Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. It's time for the first official garden tour of the 2024 season. So it's mostly going to be a tour of cool weather plants today. You know, here in Connecticut we have not had our last frost date yet. So you'll notice a lot of my beds are still empty. I don't have tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, anything like that out yet, anything that's really frost sensitive. So mostly we'll just be taking a look at the garden and I'll show you what I have growing for cool weather crops. So as we head on into the garden, you'll see that I have 3 beds covered with insect netting. These are all the brassicas. We planted most of these together the other day. So at least in my area, brassicas, which includes broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage, kale, Brussels sprouts, you know, all the plants in that family are really susceptible to being eaten by a lot of pests. In my area, it's mostly the cabbage worm. So I find that the best way and the least labor-intensive way to keep these plants safe is to cover them with this insect netting. So that's what I do, and that allows me to harvest really good quality vegetables while not having to spray anything toxic in my garden. So this front bed here has broccoli in it. I'm just going to open up this netting so we can take a look inside. So here you can see these broccoli seedlings that we planted together a few days ago. They're still on the small side, but they have actually grown quite a bit since we planted them. So if you saw that video, you probably noticed a little bit of a change. One thing you could definitely notice is all these little lettuce seedlings popping up here. Got lots of various lettuces popping up in between all the broccoli plants. So one thing we did when we planted all of these broccoli seedlings together was in between them, we planted a lot of lettuce seedlings very thickly together that I'm just going to harvest as baby greens. Those will basically work as a living mulch for the broccoli, which will benefit both the broccoli and the lettuce as the season goes on. So I'm really excited to see that those are starting to germinate really well. They're really just starting to come up, but you can already see a lot of variation in the different types of lettuce that we have growing here. So throughout this garden, you'll see a lot of cool weather crops today. You'll also see that I have started to transplant out a lot of those winter sown seedlings. You know, not that long ago I did an update video showing how all of my seedlings that I winter sowed, how they did, how different varieties did, and, you know, basically comparing them. So the final test for that will be to see how well they transplant out into the garden and just how well they grow as the season goes on. So throughout this garden, you'll see little bits of those winter sown seedlings here and there. You can see I've got some poppies that I transplanted out, and also a little bit of chamomile here, a little more chamomile. So lots of plants that got transplanted out. I've also got a little row of onions here. I bought these as starts and I just transplanted these out. This one got a little buried. Just transplanted these out recently too, so these are really still just getting established. Moving on over here to this bed, which for the most part is empty right now. You can see I've got a row of onions here. Along with this is more winter sown chamomile. I've got some alyssum that I've transplanted out. I like to use a lot of alyssum as borders in my bed because it's a really low growing plant, so it's great for the edges. It spreads out and makes a nice ground cover. You know, it's good to use on the edges both for beauty and just for mulching the edges for water conservation, things like that. And it's really good at attracting beneficial insects. So alyssum is one of my go-to garden companion plants. Here on the inside of the garden fence, you can see that my snap peas are coming up really nicely. When we head out of this garden area, we'll take a look at the outside of the fence and you'll see that there's a lot more peas coming up out there too. So as we move on, you can see these 2 beds are primarily empty here, these little mini beds. This one will have, I think, cherry tomatoes or paste tomatoes, I'm not sure which. This will have the other. So 1 bed of all cherry tomatoes and 1 bed of all sauce tomatoes. This bed here, you can see the front of it's empty. This will all have tomatoes growing on the trellis there. Since I'm growing my tomatoes vertically, they're not actually going to take up a huge amount of ground space in the garden, which means I have this whole area in front of the tomatoes that I can plant something else. Now behind the tomatoes, as we go around in just a minute, you'll see back there, I'm planting some more shade tolerant crops, you know, lettuces and other greens like that. In the front, because this is going to get more sun, not blocked by the tomatoes, I'm going to plant a variety of things on those different beds. You know, we'll try some zucchinis and summer squash. We'll try some winter squash. We'll see. We'll see what we get to there. I'm not sure exactly. We'll see how everything kind of comes together when it's time to actually plant that out in a couple weeks. So since I mentioned the lettuce on the back of this tomato bed here, let's take a look at this. These lettuce plants are looking really good. You know, they're very small, much too small to harvest. But you can see they're coming up nice and thickly, and you can see a lot of difference in the varieties here. So I like to sow my lettuce seeds really thickly, as you can see there. For the most part, that's how I grow most of my lettuce, and then I like to harvest it as baby greens. If you want to grow your lettuce for full-size heads, to harvest the entire head at once, you'll want to space them. Definitely give them more space than I did, but as I said, I like to harvest them as baby greens. I'll show you how I harvest them as the season goes on. I really love that these little Merlot lettuce seedlings, they're already this really rich color, even though they're so tiny. And then over here, we've got Butter Crunch. This is my favorite lettuce variety, so I'm really excited about that. Here's Marvel of Four Seasons, which is similar to Butter Crunch, a little bit reddish tinged. We've got Black Seeded Simpson here. And then going down, we've got some Asian greens and some Swiss chard on the bed here, which are doing okay. Not as well as the lettuce, but we'll see how they do as the season goes on. And then, you know, I've got some random little dill seedlings, and here's some chamomile I transplanted. So lots of little things. Looks like a calendula sprout back there. I find in the garden, I think this is especially true of lettuce, but I think it's also true of a lot of other seedlings too. It seems like, you know, they sprout, they're so small, they stay small for so long. It feels like they're not really growing, and then all of a sudden the growth just exponentially takes off. The lettuce is still small, but it's almost to that point of where the growth is going to really take off, so it won't actually be that long before we have more than we can eat for salads from this garden, and I can't wait for that. So moving back here to this bed, this is going to be a variety of things, primarily annual herbs. This is actually my parsley from last year. You can see it looks really lush and abundant. Parsley's a biennial, which means that this is actually going to flower really soon. So biennial plants are a little bit different. They're not exactly like annuals or perennials. They usually live for 2 years. What happens is the first year it focuses on its root system and focuses on its leaves. The second year it's going to focus on reproduction. So the second year it'll send up, you know, a lot of flowers and then eventually make seeds and then die because it's fulfilled its purpose. So this parsley here, you know, I am going to need to harvest what I want from this really soon. So I've been harvesting already, but I'm probably going to take a pretty decent sized harvest of this lettuce so that I can get, calling this lettuce, I'm going to probably take a really decent sized harvest of this parsley before it bolts and sends up its flowers. Back here you can see I have, these are really tiny, but I have a few little new parsley seedlings that I've planted to be the harvest for later in this year. You'll find that a lot of plants, probably most plants that you're harvesting for the leaves, you want to try to get what you want from that harvest before they bolt, before they send up their flowers and turn their attention to seed production. Because in most cases, what happens at that point is that the flavor of the leaves changes. A lot of times it becomes really bitter or really sharp, not necessarily an enjoyable flavor anymore. So for the most part, this is especially true of lettuce and plants like that. For the most part, you want to harvest those types of plants before they go to seed. What I'll probably do is I'll harvest a lot of that, I keep wanting to call it lettuce, a lot of that parsley before it bolts to get the good flavor. And then I'll probably let some of it go to seed so I can collect seeds for next year, or it might even reseed itself, which is even better. So in here you can see I've got some poppies. These were winter sown that I transplanted out. I've got some chamomile, which I think got kind of covered, but that seems like it's transplanting well. This is a random tiny onion that I did not plant. I think this came up, I must have missed it last year. More chamomile that's again kind of buried. And then turning to this bed over here, this is another brassica bed. So let me uncover this so we can take a look inside. Before we do that, I'll take a look at chamomile. This is new winter sown chamomile that I just transplanted. This is chamomile that overwintered from last year, which I didn't know chamomile would do that, but I'm interested to see how this performs this year having overwintered. So here you can see my second broccoli bed. Again, these are still small, but they have grown noticeably since we planted them together the other day. So I've got the same 3 varieties in this bed that I have in the other bed. So in both of the broccoli beds, I have a mix of Eastern Magic broccoli, which is my go-to reliable type of broccoli. I've also got some imperial broccoli, which I'm trying for the first time. because it has a later maturity date, I was trying to spread out the harvest a little bit. And I've got some Romanesco, broccoli, cauliflower, differing opinions on that. So I've got some Romanesco just because I wanted to try it, and it sounds really delicious. So in both of the two beds, I've got both types of broccoli. And over here, just like the other bed, I've also got some lettuce growing as a winter mulch. I do also doing a little bit of an experiment with my broccoli. If you've been following along with me, you know that I started the majority of my broccoli traditionally inside under grow lights, but there's some that I winter sowed as well. So I made sure to plant some of each and some of each variety in the two different beds. So as the season goes on, we'll compare and see which growing method seems to work better, at least in my area. Here you can see the lettuce seedlings over here coming up really well. Over here, this is actually arugula. But between all the other broccoli varieties, I've got lettuce, and it's looking really good. So over here, I've got my final brassica bed. The other two both had broccoli. This has a mix of cauliflower, cabbage, and kale. So we'll uncover this and take a closer look. So in this bed here, you can see I have a larger number of plants spaced a little bit more closely together. Broccoli is a plant that takes up a lot of space and therefore needs to be spaced pretty widely. I find that kale and other plants in this bed can handle being spaced a little more closely. So in this end of the bed, I've got my cauliflower, which I know that it actually doesn't look that amazing, but my cauliflower went through kind of some trauma this year, and so I'm actually pretty impressed with how well it's rebounded now that it's in the ground. This one is actually a cabbage, but all the other plants at this end of the bed are cauliflower. I've got my scallions here. These are basically perennialized that come back every year. Through here, I've got my sprouting broccoli. These plants, they're all still small, but they look nice and healthy, so I'm happy with that. Sprouting broccoli, you can see I'm growing the variety Asperbrock. This is new to me, so I'm excited to try it this year. Then over here, I have a variety of different kales. And in the back, you can see I have a couple plants that came back from last year. So let's go take a closer look at those. This is orange Swiss chard, and you can see there's another orange Swiss chard in the back. These both overwintered. I planted these last year. Got a little bit of a harvest from them, and they're coming back really nicely now. And then over in the back there is some perpetual spinach. This is called perpetual spinach, but it's actually Swiss chard. It has a more spinach-like flavor than a lot of Swiss chard, and I'm really excited that this came back really well because I'm hoping to be able to save seeds from this year. So it should make seeds for me this year. So that perpetual spinach and the orange Swiss chard were actually winter sown last year. I winter sowed those last year and then transplanted them out here. So they did well last season. The fact that they came back and look really good this spring, that says a little bit about the benefits of winter sowing. So I'm happy that those are doing well, with really minimal effort on my part. Okay, so across the walkway, I've got this bed here. On the far side of this trellis is going to be more tomato plants. And then in the back, I've got lettuce started, quite a few varieties. You can see these are a little bit behind. The lettuce is in the other bed. That is intentional. So a plant like lettuce that has a fairly short maturity date, and in some ways it has actually a fairly short harvesting window because it is so susceptible to summer heat. I like to do what is called succession sowing with that lettuce, which basically means that I'm going to basically keep replanting every few weeks as the season goes on until it gets too hot for that lettuce. So you saw on the first tomato bed that we looked at, the lettuce in the back of that looks quite a bit more advanced than the lettuce here. That's because I planted it. I don't really remember exactly the dates when I planted it, but I know I planted it earlier than this current lettuce that we're looking at now. So the idea is that I'll be harvesting that lettuce. Then when that lettuce is kind of done and is succumbing to bolting, the lettuce here should be really picking up and be ready to harvest. Additionally, I do also have the lettuces planted under my broccolis, which are behind this. So the idea is that we'll keep the lettuce harvest coming, hopefully all season long until it gets well into summer and gets too hot for it. So you can see I have yet to plant anything growing up my arch trellises, but I do have some little alyssum plants kind of tucked along the edges here. Everything I'm planting on these arch trellises really needs the heat of summer and is sensitive to frost, so we can't plant those yet. So heading to this bed here, this trellis will be my third and final tomato wall. And in the back, I've got some other plants here. This is celery, but I think with the exception of the celery, These are all plants that I winter sowed this year. So these are a variety of different Asian greens that I have here. You can see some bugs have already been enjoying an early taste of my harvest. So all of these, and then there's a little more celery there, which I just transplanted yesterday. It's not super happy yet. But yeah, these are small, but it shouldn't be too long. Got some chamomile here. Shouldn't be too long before these really perk up and are hopefully ready for a good harvest. So that's what I have growing in this main garden area here. I'm just going to recover all these brassica beds and we'll head on over to the garden expansion, see what's going on over there. So before we head on to the garden expansion, I wanted to just show you some of the peas we have growing on this side of the fence here. And then as we go around the corner, these peas, which are planted later, are just starting to come up. I planted my peas in 2 batches because, you know, the first day that was actually warm and that the soil could be worked, I had to come out here and just get my hands in the dirt and do something in the garden. So I came out here and planted a big batch of peas. And then a couple weeks later, I came out and planted a second batch of peas. It's always interesting when you can compare something like that, the same crop grown at different times. The first peas, you know, they're obviously a little more advanced. They have been growing out here longer. But the second peas germinated much more quickly than the first batch. So I'm not sure if they're going to catch up or if we're going to get a succession sowing in a second crop of peas. We'll see what happens. But either way, we should have an abundant pea harvest, so I'm excited about that. So as we head over to the garden expansion, you can see our daffodils are still beautiful. They are unfortunately on the way out, but I've really enjoyed the show they put on while it lasted. So here we have the garden expansion project this year. I'm really excited about it. It's been really nice having it already established this year so I can just plant stuff out here right away. So let's take a look at what's growing so far. So along the edge here, these are all perennial herbs that I established last year. So this is thyme, which you can see is starting to really spread out and take over. Got some lavender here. And as we go up the steps, you know, got some sage coming back, a little more lavender. So some nice variety of herbs here. It's kind of weird how, you know, when you make a big change like that, you know, for the longest time, this area of my yard was just empty and not really used. And then last spring, I put in this whole garden expansion area because I decided it would be put to better use growing food for us. Oh my goodness, Milo is so dirty. You can see, I don't know if you can see how dirty he is. When the sun comes out, he likes to come out and find patches of dirt and just roll in it. So he is so dirty. So this time of year, he's always so dirty. We have to do a little check on him whenever he comes to the door to come inside. Make sure he doesn't have to be cleaned off first so he doesn't get our house all gross. So what I was saying was that the garden expansion, you know, we went many years at this house without having anything here. It was just an open area. And then last year, I did a lot of work really transforming the space. And now it kind of seems like, I don't know, it seems like it's always been here. So it's interesting how we went so long without something like this, and now once it's here, it just feels like it's always been that way. So here along the fence, you can see my lemon balm is coming up really well. It smells so good, and lemon balm makes the most delicious tea, so it's definitely an herb worth growing. So in this first bed here, there isn't much growing yet. You can see I planted a row of onion transplants along the edge, a couple poppies that I transplanted that were winter sown. Ultimately, my plan for this bed and the 2 beds over to my right, I want to have a rotation system going where 2 of those beds will be strawberries and 1 will be garlic. And then the idea is that every year I'll transplant out the runners from the bed of strawberries into the other bed of strawberries, and I'll just rotate out the strawberries every couple years because from what I hear, strawberries are really only productive for a couple years. So if I continually rotate them out with fresh strawberries made by the runners, and then just kind of rotate them with garlic. I haven't really worked out all the details of that yet, but that's my plan. So that's a really long-winded way of saying this bed ultimately is going to be a second strawberry bed, but because I don't have strawberries that are ready to go in this bed yet, I think this year I'm going to put a few tomatoes in this bed. I did that last year. They actually did really well. So what I'll probably do is I think 4 tomato plants in this bed, which will have to be just supported by tomato cages because I don't have any sort of permanent support here. And then I think along the edges, you know, I've got onions here already, but I think along the other edges I'll probably plant some flowers and some basil, some things like that. You can see my strawberry bed here, which I just topped with a fresh layer of compost. So the strawberries are still sort of adjusting to that. I planted these strawberries last year, so I'm hoping we'll get a nice strawberry harvest this year. So this is, you know, it's just a little raised bed. It's 8 foot by 4 foot raised bed. I don't anticipate that we're going to get enough strawberries to basically, just for all of our family strawberry consumption. I don't think we'll get enough to make jam or anything like that. But my goal with these strawberries is to get enough for fresh eating, maybe make some strawberry shortcake, desserts like that, and just really enjoy them. And we'll probably still go to a local farm for our main strawberry picking and hopefully make some jam from that. So I'm still figuring out exactly what is going to go on these 3 arch trellises here. Thinking one is probably going to be mini melons, mini pumpkins, and then probably also some winter squash for the 3rd one, but I'm still deciding for sure. So in this little no-dig bed here, you can see the raspberries are doing really well, which would be a good thing, except that this is actually supposed to be the asparagus bed, and the raspberries have taken it over. So when I planted my asparagus in this bed here, I definitely underestimated the spreading nature of raspberries. You know, I know that they spread. I know that they'll take over any area they're given. But what you can see there, down there, is my main raspberry bed, and this stone wall is raised several feet above that bed. I know it's kind of hard to see from this angle. There is a little bit of a walkway there. Again, hard to see, not because of the angle, just because I haven't cleaned up this bed yet. So there is a paver walkway there. And then beyond that is the asparagus bed. And I didn't really realize that raspberries were such aggressive spreaders that they would send their roots out under the wall, under the walkway, up several feet up into this asparagus bed here, which, you know, now that I'm thinking about it, it should have been fairly obvious, but I just didn't really think it through. So I don't think that there's any way to combat the raspberries in this bed. Definitely not without hurting the asparagus. So I'm not exactly sure what to do. I'm debating about digging up the asparagus and moving it to a better location. I wouldn't do that until fall, but I'm not really sure if that's the best course of action. If you have suggestions about that, definitely let me know. It's kind of upsetting because I've wanted asparagus for so long. I finally located a spot, and then the raspberries, you know, the raspberries have been situated on the other side of the stone wall for years, and they just picked this year, or last year really, to take over when I planted the asparagus here. I don't know if they could just sense that I basically enriched the soil with lots of delicious compost or what, or if it was just going to happen anyway that time. I don't know. But of course, right when I planted the asparagus here, the raspberries then decided to encroach on the spot. So suggestions are welcome. I'm not really sure what to do. I'm thinking that the asparagus probably won't survive well with the raspberries here, but I'm not sure how well it'll survive moving either. So again, let me know what you would do in that situation. So walking along the path here, it is really exciting to see these asparagus spears coming up, but I don't really feel as excited as I would because I know that it's not going to do all that well in this location. So across the path from that raspberry/asparagus bed, I've got this bed here, which will be sweet potatoes this year. Right now I have a row of onions planted all along the edge so far. And then this basically makeshift mulch I have here. This is all vines from last year that grew in this bed. So last year I did have sweet potatoes in this same bed, which I know I'm planting a lot of things in the same area that I had them last year, which I know is not necessarily ideal when it comes to crop rotation. But because I'm heavily amending these beds and because these weren't troubled by any kind of pests or anything like that or any disease, I think that it'll be okay. So I am planning to do sweet potatoes here. This mulch here is a mix of the dead sweet potato vines from last year, and I also had trailing nasturtiums in this bed, so it's a mix of the vines of those two plants that I put it there over the winter to protect the soil. Then when I amended this bed this spring with compost, I just replaced the mulch. And I think I'll probably chop it down a little bit and then use it as mulch this year. As we move on from the sweet potato bed, back here in this bed, this is going to be sort of a hodgepodge random bed this year. You can see I have a little bit of broccoli planted here. And I've got some onions planted on the edge. It's kind of, as I said, kind of a little bit random. This was my potato bed last year. I've actually decided to take a year off from growing potatoes. They didn't really do all that well for me last year, and because I have extra brassica plants and extra tomato plants, I decided to make this bed, kind of use it for those instead. So the broccoli over here doesn't look quite as good as the broccoli in my main garden area. There's a couple reasons for that. One is really simply that I planted all of the best transplants over in the main garden area. I know that they're going to get the most sun over there, the most ideal growing conditions, so I put the best plants over there to hopefully get the best harvest. These were kind of my extras that just kind of got planted over here to see what happens. Additionally, I did transplant those in the garden I transplanted those longer ago than these, so these have just they haven't really had a chance to settle in that much yet, so that's another reason. Third reason is that I know I kind of mentioned over there they get more sun in the main garden. They don't get as much sun here, so it's kind of going to be a toss-up to see how well they do in this bed, but we'll find out. The reason I chose this half of the bed for tomatoes is because this is the sunnier half. Tomatoes need sun more than broccoli does, and they're also, honestly, a more important crop to me. So you can see that I have a few milk jugs here. These are all winter sown. This is a alyssum. This was not winter sown. I just need to transplant these out, but I just haven't gotten to all these yet. I've got some dill in here, and then various brassicas. I think this one's kale. So those are just waiting their turn to be transplanted out. Now here behind me, you can see my garlic, which this time of year is probably the most impressive looking thing in the garden. Garlic, of course, gets a little bit of a head start because it does best planted in the fall. So it can establish its root system all fall, all winter, and then it comes up in the spring, just ready to grow and hopefully make delicious garlic for us. So the majority of this bed is German white or German extra hardy, which is the garlic I generally grow. And these, you can see the leaves look a little bit different. This is actually elephant garlic. Elephant garlic is new to me. I've never grown it before. And I've heard mixed reviews about how well it does in my area. I think it prefers a slightly warmer climate than I have. But it did make it through the winter, which I would think is probably the biggest challenge when it comes to climate. So we'll see how it does this year. And I'll see how it compares to my German white garlic, which is my tried and true that I grow every year. So over here against this fence, I've got my blackberries. And I need to, they're actually, you can see they're starting to sprawl. So I need to really get serious about making a trellis for these and supporting these this year. And I'm hoping to actually get some blackberry fruit this year. So thank you so much for taking a walk through my garden with me in this kind of early season garden tour. I know as the season goes on and I get more things planted, it gets warmer, we've got warm weather crops growing, the trellises get covered. It's going to be a lot more exciting in future garden tours, but I just wanted to give you kind of a baseline, a starting point, and also to see how the cool weather crops are really starting off. So I hope that you'll join me again, and probably the next garden tour will be after I get my tomatoes planted out in the garden, so there'll be a lot more going on then. So I definitely hope you'll join me for that. So I hope you're having a great day. I hope that you are enjoying springtime where you live, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.